Yeah. Hey,
Can't
so
even click on the screen.
Just refresh the page.
All right.
okay, yeah. It was just not showing up for us. Sorry, chat. Anyways, so
Is it still?
we are. No, it's good.
We're,
It's good.
We're live.
Okay, yeah, we're live.
Fine.
It was. Man,
Glitchy.
I don't know why it was glitching out, but it was.
Chris
it
is
was.
our tech guy, but he doesn't ever just immediately do the most obvious things like refresh the page or turn it off and turn it on again.
No, I don't like doing the most obvious thing first because it's usually the most convoluted thing that breaks first because sometimes I can identify. Never mind. There's other noticeable causes, whatever.
Sure.
Anyways, so yeah, we are covering Hebrews today. And in terms of being a Hebrew work, it's not. In terms of being a Greek work, it's actually a really tough one, like linguistically speaking. It's actually very difficult, like Koine Greek. Out of all the Greek in the New Testament, which is admittedly not, it's admittedly a lot easier than, the Iliad or something like that. But this is hard in relation to all that. Because Koine Greek would be the easiest dialect of Greek, but of Koine Greek, this letter is written very, very high-mindedly.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but yeah,
Is it
a lot
a joke?
Is it a joke? Like, what do you mean? Is it a joke?
Is it a
Like,
joke?
is that why they wrote it that way? Is it a joke? Like, why'd they
No,
do that?
no. It's just the author is just that way. I guess it's not Paul, by the way.
Okay.
But
Oh, thank
See-
goodness. It's not Paul or fake
About
Paul.
time.
not Paul. Yeah.
Or fake Paul.
No, well, the thing is, it's not Paul or fake Paul, but it's a lot of people used to think it was Paul.
Oh, no.
So it never claimed to be Paul.
Oh, no.
Or actually,
Still-
does it? Actually, yeah.
No,
it does.
we'll get
Yeah,
into
sorry,
it in a
does,
moment, but I have the King James version
Or
of the
fake
Bible.
Paul.
It's actually kind of, yeah, we'll get into
He
all
has
that.
the English
English Standard, yeah.
standard version. I have the Jewish Annotated New Testament and the NIV Study Bible. We have the NIV New Testament Survey, Eerdman's commentary on the Bible. We have
from the Hermenia commentary series, from Harold W. Attridge, the commentary and translation of Hebrews. We also have Bart Ehrman's Forgery and Counterforgery. We have, I guess we also have the Septuagint with Apocrypha if we need it.
and the Oxford Companion of the Bible.
If you say so. We have the Text of the New Testament by Bruce Manning Metzger. We have
The Historical Jesus in Context by Amy Jill Levine and others.
we also have the Greek New Testament
And a textual guide to the Greek New Testament.
yeah, we have all that. We have a few more books as well, but either way, yeah. So this book, which it does claim to be written by Paul, but I'm not actually sure about the origin of that because I feel like at some point.
No, it doesn't claim to be written by Paul. Let me tell you something, Lawrence. The writer of this letter does not identify himself, but he was obviously well known to the original recipients.
Wait, hold on. Then what am I reading in the Greek?
What are you reading in the Greek? Because mine says the writer of the letter does not identify himself. Though for some 1,200 years, circa AD 400 to 1600, the book was commonly called the Epistle of Paul to the Hebrews.
Yeah, we're
there
gonna
was
get into that,
no agreement in the earliest centuries regarding its authorship. Since the Reformation, it has been widely recognized that Paul could not have been the writer. Since there is no disharmony between the teachings of Hebrews and that of Paul's letters, but the specific emphases and writing styles are markedly different. Contrary to Paul's usual practice, the author of Hebrews nowhere identifies himself in the letter, except to indicate that he was a man in 1132.
Here's what happened. Yeah. So I had this open to Hebrews, right? And then while I was reading something out, the page flipped to Philemon. So I was looking at it like, what the fuck? Why is this in here? But yeah, I didn't think that it cited it. But then I looked at my page and I was like, wait, it's right there. So, goddamn. Mm-hmm. Okay, you know what? These things kind of suck. At this point.
So I'm gonna.
These things are causing me aneurysms.
Yeah, they are failing in their mission.
They're good in the middle.
Yeah,
They're not good at the beginning, which we didn't have them for.
Or the end, yeah.
Nor towards the end.
no. But the earliest suggestion of authorship is found in Tertullian's De Pudicitia, 20, circa 200, in which he quotes from an epistle to the Hebrews under the name of Barnabas.
Right. I am going to get into that. So in terms of it being written by Paul, almost definitely not. And while there was a lot of arguing in the early church, in fact, there's a lot of guessing about it in the early church, about who wrote it and where they were from. Like some of the monikers would be like, oh, this is a letter to the Hebrews from Paul, written from Rome, and then they'd get more specific in some places.
Yeah. But this says the Hebrews must have been written before the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in 70 AD, because one, had it been written after this date, the author surely would have mentioned the temple's destruction and the end of the Jewish sacrificial system. And two, the author consistently uses the Greek present tense when speaking of the temple and the priestly activities connected with it.
You say that. There is a long argument in here about how, well, first of all, I would say that doesn't even really track by itself, because there is something called a historical present. Like, if we read old Greek texts, they use the present tense talking about something that happened.
So I
in the
goes
past.
to this place and guy says to me,
Yeah. So
is God real? No, absolutely not.
I don't think so.
That's absurd.
So when which God is also a good question, but
Timmy,
still
the albino life god.
I'd never heard of that one.
Really?
Yeah, that's a new one.
Wow.
Oh wow. So when it comes to authorship, we talked about it not being Paul. So contextual factors, however, are decisive. It is quite inconceivable that Paul, who so emphatically affirms his status as an apostle and eyewitness to the risen Christ, could have put himself in the subordinate position of a second-hand recipient of tradition, as does our author in 2:3. So he puts himself in a secondary place, but if you remember from Paul, he says that he had a revelation, right? So why would you put yourself, saying that you got your sources of information were from the first generation of Christians, when you would totally be like, I got revelation. Why would I need to cite someone else? So, but yeah, on
like God,
Barnabas,
Okay.
you were noting Barnabas.
Yeah.
That was one of the ideas here. So the early acceptance in the east of Hebrews as Pauline was not duplicated in the Latin West. The Muratorian canon, which probably dates from the late 2nd century, does not mention Hebrews. Roman leaders from the same period, such as the presbyter Gaius, do not include Hebrews among Pauline texts, nor does their contemporary, the heresiologist Irenaeus. And then, you noted how Tertullian noted that it was Barnabas. The data of Acts and the Pauline epistles indicate characteristics of Barnabas that would indeed suit the author of Hebrews. He was a Levite from Cyprus, and Luke interprets his name to mean son of consolation. He was apparently a member of the Hellenist faction in the Jerusalem community, and may therefore have shared the anti-temple perspectives attributed to Stephen in Acts 7. He was influential in the community at Antioch, and for a time was a close collaborator with Paul. So all of it would fit with the author of Hebrews, but the break between Paul and Barnabas suggests otherwise. This was probably not, as Acts 15 describes, a matter of differences over personnel, but a result of Barnabas's behavior in the dispute at Antioch. A person who would give even this much legitimacy to kashrut laws. Not entirely sure what those are.
Kosher.
Oh, so why did they say kashrut? Is that how it used to be spelled?
Yeah, you can say it that way.
I've never heard it that way.
That's not kashrut.
I've literally never heard kosher be kashrut. So, anyways, kosher laws is unlikely to have composed Hebrews 7:11 through 19, 9 through 10, and 13:9.
It still said kashrut.
Maybe in Hebrew, but at least in everything I've ever read, it's always been kosher. I've always just read it as kosher. No one's ever used that term before. At least
it's because
for
you
me.
never participated in any Jewish activities.
That is true.
Went to any Jewish events or...
Yeah, that's true.
I don't think you weren't even like
but
bar
even when
mitzvahed, were you?
No, I was not. But
Oh,
even when we went to, even when I had like the courses on Judaism, they would say kosher laws.
Kashrut is more general, yes.
Okay, fine. So, yeah, Walter Tullian's suggested author has appealed to some modern scholars. He is as unlikely as Paul. There's also the idea of Apollos, another candidate, initially proposed by Luther. It has attracted a good deal of support. So, yeah, he goes off to list the similarities there. But then he goes on to say this loose association with the Pauline mission could account for some of these similarities too, as well as differences from the Pauline corpus. Apollos might well be the sort of person who could have composed Hebrews, but too little is known of his specific teaching to allow a positive identification. There are a whole slew of others, it looks like. So from people like Priscilla, for example, and Aquila, Silas or Silvanus, a whole bunch of people have been noted who could be the possible author, right?
All right. So now that we've gotten some of that authorship stuff out of the way, let me tell you a little bit about this book itself. I have a guide to reading section here. Yes.
Okay.
Because Hebrews argues for Jesus' superiority over all else and the obsolescence of the covenant God made with Moses at Mount Sinai, it expresses what scholars call supersessionist theology. Supersessionism is the idea that Christ's entry into human history replaces all that has come before, including God's unique covenantal bond with Israel. The same idea is sometimes referred to as rejection or replacement theology. Although post-biblical Judaism differed in many ways from ancient Israelite religion, as reflected in the Tanakh, and although one could argue that rabbinic halakha, informed as it is by the oral Torah, replaced the temple cult, the Pharisees and later the rabbis never speak of the Judaism they created as superior to the covenants God made with Israel. On the contrary, the Torah is given to Moses. It remains esteemed above all other sources of authority, and rabbinic writings, unlike the New Testament, never became part of the biblical canon. While rabbinic Jews, ancient and modern, may in practice adhere more closely to prescriptions in the Mishnah than the Torah, they do not regard the Mishnah as a divine document on par with the Torah. Jews do not read from the entire Mishnah as part of worship, and handling the Mishnah does not involve the same elaborate reverential prescriptions as the Torah requires. The language of continuity between biblical promises / covenants / laws and rabbinic halakha dominates post-biblical Jewish texts. This attitude can be easily seen in the opening lines of Mishnah Avot, which states that Moses received the Torah from Sinai, and then it passed through a chain of succession from Joshua, the elders, the prophets, and the men of the great synagogue to the rabbis of the Mishnah. By contrast, mature Christianity came to see the incarnation of Christ as a rupture with the past insofar as Christ was the culmination of God's relationship with humanity in general and Israel in particular. Ultimately, Christianity, as the religion that developed around worship of Christ, understood itself as having replaced not just the covenant between Israel and God, but Judaism as a religion. Hebrews is the foundation of this idea that Christianity has replaced Judaism. Supersessionist theology inscribes Judaism as an obsolete, illegitimate religion, and in the New Testament, this idea is articulated no more plainly than in Hebrews. Drawing on Jeremiah's reference, 31:31, to a new covenant, the author of Hebrews calls Mosaic law only a shadow of the good things to come in 10:1, and insists that in speaking of a new covenant, he has made the first one obsolete, and what is obsolete and growing old will soon disappear in 8:13. That didn't really happen. Such language helped foster the view that Judaism was an inferior religion, at best a precursor to Christ. In recent years, some scholars have made efforts to address the problem of anti-Judaism in Hebrews, and have attempted to offer an alternative lens for reading Hebrews' disparaging comments.
Isn't it weird, though, that it's named Hebrews?
Yeah.
Well,
It's to the Hebrews.
yeah, it's supposed to be to the Hebrews.
I see.
Yeah.
Disparaging comments by means of attending to their historical context. For example,
These are things you got to tell the Hebrews.
if Hebrews is written after the destruction of the temple, the language of supersessionism can be viewed not as a prescribed attack on Jewish ritual practice, but rather as an attempt to cope with the desperate reality that, in fact, worshiping God by means of the temple cult is no longer an option. Framing Hebrews this way analogizes it to the Mishnah, where the absence of a temple necessitates translating the complex of temple cult practices into other forms. There remains, however, a difference. The Mishnah never disparages either Israel's past ritual practice or the institutions that sustain those practices, like the temple and the priesthood. Part of the agenda of the Mishnah may have been to provide guidance about the observance of Torah in the absence of a temple, but it does not do so by lamenting that the past practice was inadequate or misguided the way that Hebrews does.
So I know that because we're going to talk about the actual addressees in a second. Like, he actually not just who's receiving the letter, but who's sending it. But on the date, you said that it couldn't have been after the destruction of the temple, right? And that is a theory that is enjoyed specifically because of the lack of the reference to the temple or the destruction of it. So only a general date can be established with any certainty for the composition of Hebrews, the development of the traditions evident in the text, the author's reference to his dependence on the original hearers of the word of salvation, and his remark that the addressees had been believers for some time would seem to suggest that at least several decades have elapsed since the beginning of the Christian movement. Very few commentators would want to date the work very much before 60 CE, a date that can serve as a rough, it's the earliest possible date. The upper end of the date range is apparently anchored by the use of Hebrews in First Clement, which is conventionally dated to 96 CE. So he goes over this pretty long argument here where he parallels both Hebrews and First Clement, and he cites some very specific things that altogether kind of make it look like, okay, so the author of First Clement knew about Hebrews. So he continues on when talking about the date that while the question of dependence can be settled definitively, the question of the date of First Clement cannot. Okay, so he goes into dating First Clement, but either way, conventionally it's 96, but then I think on the high end, he made it around 120, somewhere around there. Mm-hmm. And the range goes from 70 to 140. That's the big range there. But many would argue that the date range can be more, at least for Hebrews, I think. The reference to the calamities is much too vague to be useful indication of date. This is still about First Clement. While passages such as 44, 1-3, and 47, 1-6 are not completely incompatible with an early dating, they do tend to favor a later dating at a somewhat more compressed date range of 90 to 120. So 96 is honestly okay. Maybe a little bit on the earlier end, but still okay. May be assumed for the epistle. That provides a rather insecure end date for Hebrews of 115. Mm-hmm. Many would argue that the date range can be more narrowly compressed, of course, to 70 CE, the year of the destruction of the temple. Several details are cited from the text to support such a dating. One such item is the reference to 40 years at 3, 10, and 17, but no special typological sense is accorded to the detail from Psalm 95 in the exegetical argument of Hebrews, and it has no significance for dating. I would agree with that. And plus, if we're talking about 40 years, right, we have to think back to the Old Testament and kind of use it as just like a long amount of time. The references to cultic activity in the present tense, I already covered that argument. It kind of does fall apart once you remember how ancient Greek actually worked. And then they reference a few times where Josephus speaks in the exact same way, where the event obviously happened in the past, but he speaks of it in the present tense. Another related argument is often advanced to support a pre-70 date, namely that the text lacks any reference to the destruction of the temple. Quite as many scholars opt for a post-70 date, largely on the basis of theological typology and literary affinities. Thus, the high Christology is especially evident in the Exordium, and the parallels with the Lucan corpus, the pastorals, and 1 Peter are taken to be warrants of a dating in the 70s and 80s. These arguments certainly have as much weight as the argument from silence adduced in favor of an earlier dating, but again, they are not decisive. So, yeah, still quite a big range, and there's still a good debate about it.
Okay, so why don't I hop into Hebrews then?
Yeah, I suppose you can do that. And remember, we don't exactly know who addressed this and to whom it was addressed. There still is a lot of debate about it. In fact, I did kind of allude to it, but I don't think I read off some of the names.
No, because it was very long.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay. Yeah, we can hop into it then.
Yeah, all right. So I'll hop into Hebrews then. Chapter 1.
Yeah, so I guess, sorry, the one thing. I know we've been doing this for 20 minutes. I know. So the question is it being addressed to a Gentile or non-Gentile community, and the kind of area that we're looking at? Is it from Rome? Is it from somewhere else? Like, these are kind of questions we have to keep in mind when reading it. So, sorry. Now we can start. And zipping it up.
Okay. Are you sure?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Okay.
This reminds me of a long, winding story that doesn't go anywhere.
Yep. Welcome to the Bible.
Like this one time that we all went down to the store, and then when we were at the store, we saw a candy bar, and the candy bar reminded us of that one time that we went to the mountains, and when we were in the mountains, Chris
Hebrews
said
1.
that he found a rock.
Yes,
that
Hebrews
reminded
1.
him. Hebrews 1. God, who at sundry times and in diverse manners spake in times past unto the fathers by the prophets. So, a lot of commentary here on the first verse.
Oh boy, yeah. Actually. This is an introduction like no other text that we've read. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very different. We aren't having like dear so and so from so and so.
Right.
Like there's usually like a blessing and like a thanksgiving.
Yeah, God's speech of old was directed to the fathers. That is to all the ancient people, yeah.
Right. Oh, to the ancestors, probably within the Jewish lineage, right?
That would make sense.
Because they're the ones who are being spoken to.
Yeah.
Right. Hath in these last days spoken unto us by his Son, whom he hath appointed heir of all things, by whom also he made the worlds, who being the brightness of his glory, and the express image of his person, and upholding all things by the word of his power, when he had himself purged our sins, sat down on the right hand of the majesty on high. So a lot of stuff going on here.
Yeah, it's right out the gate with some high Christologies here.
First of all, for God to have created a physical image that's a perfect representation of him would be a sin, because it would be breaking one of his own commandments. I don't think that is an accurate depiction of what was going on there, because tons of people would find that problematic.
Well, I mean, yeah. But this is kind of the difference between some of the late Christological texts and some of the earlier ones.
Mhm.
Yeah. Let's see. In these final days, God has spoken to us through. So the Son is the messenger. Whom He established as the heir of all things. He's going to inherit it. He also created the universe.
Mhm.
Good translation there.
It's ionos, which could be aeons. Although the word is plural,
aeon.
it does not imply a multiplicity of worlds. Although we have had multiplicities of worlds in Apocrypha.
We have, yeah. But so who being the radiance of His glory and the imprint of His fundamental reality, bearing all things by His powerful word.
So He sits on the right hand of God here. This occurs in Psalm 110, verse 1. The author appeals to this psalm several times throughout Hebrews. So we're going to run into that a few times.
Yeah, the term for fundamental reality appears 3 times in Hebrews, and it's hypostasis. Oh, this is hypostasis. Okay, gotcha. All right. Appears 3 times in Hebrews with slightly different but overlapping nuances. In none of these passages does it have the technical sense of discrete entity or person of the Godhead that it eventually comes to have in Trinitarian theology. It does, however, especially in this context, have a philosophical denotation that ultimately derives from Stoicism. That sense developed from the scientific and medical uses of the term for a sediment that collects at the bottom of and hence stands under hypohistami, a solution. The term eventually came to refer to whatever underlies a particular phenomena, whatever it is in actuality, or its most basic or fundamental reality or essence. So
wait, what's the term?
It will be hypostasis, but
Hypostasis.
yeah, hypostasis. So this is a term that's used throughout Christology since, and apparently it's used a lot of times in Hebrews. So yeah, they share the same. The imprint of His hypostasis. So His essence, bearing all things by His word. So He's literally just, I guess, you could literally have this as like a God on earth figure, but as like some duplicate, but not as the same. Like it's really, this is the kind of Christological shit that I'm talking about. Like, to me, the idea that this was a later text because of its Christology being so deep already is like, to me, it speaks of a later text.
Well, it's substantially different from anything else that we've seen before.
Yeah,
which could suggest an earlier text.
Doubt. The text that we get from even the Gospels and Paul's authentic letters, the text that we get nowhere near as deep as this already, and we just started.
Yeah,
and we're gonna get into it more, but
okay. So like all of Paul's letters and the Gospels together, nowhere near as deep as 3 verses of Hebrews.
Wow.
In terms of Christology, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
I don't know. That's pretty hyperbolic.
Only a little. That's the thing.
Only a little.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess. So I'm only on verse 4.
Yeah.
Being made so much better than the angels, as he hath by inheritance obtained a more excellent name than they. So by this time there would have been established angelologies with hierarchies, which would show like Enoch, when he becomes Metatron, is established above the rest of the angels, while Christ here is even further above that. Right? So
yeah. So in fact, Enoch and the whole Metatron thing is noted in here, but it's also really interesting that they have established not only an angelology, but have established like some kind of order of events. Like this being created the universe, it says, or created, the world.
Yeah.
but he was also placed before the angels. So the angels are not part of his creation.
No, he's made better than them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I don't think that they're part of his creation. But you can say that he made like this world, the material world, but then you would still have another being that is exalting this Christ figure, this Logos
No,
figure.
that's the Father.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now it would be the Father, yeah. But it's already getting fucking wild, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
For unto which of the angels said he at any time, Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee. And again, I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. So it's a rhetorical question, obviously. This has not happened for the angels. They must be pretty salty.
Yeah.
And again, when he bringeth in the first begotten into the world, he saith, and let all the angels of God worship him. What?
Yeah. So
What?
hold on.
Okay. Well, so this is the life of Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is really interesting. So first it starts off with, you are my son, today I have begotten you. Or sorry, yeah, for to which of the angels did he ever say? Yeah, so he's not begetting them. So very clearly he didn't create them. And again, yeah, I shall be his father and he will be my son. You know what that sounds a whole lot like? Adoptionism.
Yeah, that does sound like adoptionism.
Yeah.
More importantly here, it references the life of Adam and Eve. I mean, there are other ways that you could interpret this.
Yeah, but no, it is a pretty direct reference to the life of Adam and Eve.
Yeah.
This
is
exactly what
actually
happens.
something that gets taken up apparently not only by Christianity, but also by Islam, because there's a command that Adam gets worshipped by the angels at the beginning too.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyways, let me continue on. And
Yeah.
okay.
That was a pretty good verse.
Yeah. And of the angels he saith, who maketh his angels spirits and his ministers a flame of fire. Here we have the flaming angels like in Enoch.
Fun.
So this is picking up on all kinds of motifs that have already been well established in apocryphal and pseudepigraphal works. So these must have been circulating around the time that this author was writing.
Yeah. Oh, it's important to remember. So when we're talking about the sonship here, it's not that far from what I've been reading about in Egyptian kingship. Weirdly enough, it's not quite the same. I want to point that out. It's not quite the same line of how divinity and royal ideology worked. It's not quite the same. But at least the terminology is pretty similar. So yeah, the son introduced into the world is described as the firstborn. The term ultimately derives from the same royal ideology evidenced in Psalm 2 and 2 Samuel 7. That's the dynastic promise, of course, being found once in the Psalms. In Greco-Jewish sources, similar terms were used, not of a messianic figure, but of wisdom, an angelic figure, and the Logos. The term was used by early Christians in two distinct ways. More commonly, it refers to Christ's resurrection, but it also appears in one Christological hymn in a protological context. Which of these traditions is most in evidence in Hebrews is unclear. Once again, we may suspect that if the term had been used to introduce the scriptural citation in a traditional catena, it would have been an eschatological messianic title. The author could well have taken it, however, as an expression of the eternal divine sonship of Christ.
Now, just wait a minute there, Lawrence.
Don't do it, Lawrence. Don't wait.
Let us make a new psalm. Because
When you say "let us make a new psalm," you know what happened the last time someone said "let's make a new psalm"?
let me tell you something. Verse 7 here, Psalm 104, verse 4. Verses 8 through 9 here, Psalm 45, verses 6 through 7. Verses 10 through 12 here,
Yeah.
Psalm 102, verses 25 through 27.
Yes.
So
A lot of citations.
yes, this is let us have a new psalm. This is what is happening right here. So let me continue on. But unto the Son he saith, Thy throne, O God, is forever and ever. A scepter of righteousness is the scepter of thy kingdom. Thou hast loved righteousness and hated iniquity. Therefore God, even thy God, hath anointed thee with the oil of gladness above thy fellows. Here being used as a messianic thing because it's anointing. It's anointed one, Mashiach, right?
Yeah.
And thou, Lord, in the beginning hast laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the works of thine hands. They shall perish, but thou remainest, and they all shall wax old as doth a garment. So these are just quotes from Psalms.
Right.
And as a vesture shalt thou fold them up, and they shall be changed. But thou art the same, and thy years shall not fail. But to which of the angels said he at any time, Sit on my right hand until I make thine enemies thy footstool? Are they not all ministering spirits sent forth to minister for them who shall be heirs of salvation? I wonder, are they? Are they all that? The
lot of
liturgia, whence liturgy.
Yeah.
Term used for priestly worship in the temple. The angels are described as in service to those who are inherent salvation. Recalls the tradition that the angels were made to worship Adam, coming from the life of Adam and Eve. See also Jubilees, where God creates many classes of angels who minister before God.
Do you remember that? I forget which text it was. The one with the hierarchy of angels, where they're all bowing to each other.
Oh, that's Third Enoch.
That was Third Enoch? Okay.
Third Enoch, horrifically bad.
Yeah.
Terrible read.
Yeah.
But it's got some fun ideas, if you can get there. Anyways, are they all ministering spirits? That's a good question. Because I don't think they're all ministering spirits. I mean, I think that some of them are ministering spirits.
Which which verse was that again?
Verse 14. Are they not all ministering spirits sent forth to minister for them who shall be heirs of salvation?
Oh, yeah, okay. Nothing too deep on that one. But I did actually want to point out, so you were mentioning how, Christ was just the word for Messiah, which just meant anointed, and that was used for
many people. Not even like I think that there's one point, Ezra and Nehemiah, where Cyrus is called a Messiah.
I don't remember if it was Ezra and Nehemiah, but there was also a reference
somewhere
in Isaiah. Yep, that did call Cyrus Christ. Yeah.
Yes. And it's used for like anyone really from the Davidic lineage, anyone really from the Aaronid lineage, right? The high priest is a Mashiach.
Yes.
Right?
The context here, the author finds the elements of a contrast between Christ and the angels implicit in the situation of Psalms. Christ, the Son and Lord, abides forever, while creatures of whatever sort pass away. The image of the garment growing old, familiar from the poetry of 2nd Isaiah, vividly describes the condition of the heavens, while the Son is said to abide. Here, one of the important themes relevant to Christ's priesthood find its first expression, for Christ will later appear as the one like Melchizedek, who had an eternally abiding office.
So I want to point out a couple of things. First, Jesus, if he's the son of Joseph, then he's a legitimate, he could be a Mashiach, right? He could be named high priest or king of Israel. And that's generally what people refer to in the Old Testament as a Mashiach. But the explicit claim is made that he's not the son of Joseph, which confuses everything. But what's supposed to make him unique here is that he's not just the royal Davidic Mashiach, but also the holy Aaronid Mashiach at the same time, right? I don't think that's demonstrated in his genealogies, but functionally, like the way that they refer to him as Christ is basically that.
Yeah, we'll get even more of that actually in the next chapter. But
I do want to point out that even that being the case, he does not fit the description of the Messiah to come.
Yeah.
That is mentioned a few times because that Messiah is a warlord.
Yeah, essentially. This one just becomes a warlord later.
Yeah, this one is supposedly supposed to come, but also like the resurrection, the stuff is like
that's like not part of it at all.
Not part of it at all, and like the miraculous birth thing is not part of it at all.
Yeah.
Like literally the only thing that's similar is that he knows the Torah.
And that he had what was it? Humble beginnings. That's about it.
Yeah. But we are at the halfway point. So,
well, I did want to point out before. Yes,
okay.
sorry.
Just
one last
hear
thing.
something in a second here.
Okay, yeah. Soon we will hear something, but for now, considering this higher Christology, the exordium, for example, contains a festive celebration of a high Christological perspective and affirms clearly the divine character of the Son and his role in creation. The following cantenna, so that's 5 through 13, focuses on the exaltation of the Son and even seems to suggest that his status as Son is dependent on the exaltation, which did kind of sound like that. As a related but even more severe antinomy affects the affirmations about the Son's status as high priest. Some passages seem to associate this office with the exalted Christ. Others clearly envision him as functioning as high priest on earth. Various explanations have been offered for the presence of such fissures in the Christology of Hebrews, and they usually play some role in reconstructions of polemical situations for the text. Thus,
this is very slowly fading us out.
Why are you doing this, Chris?
Because it's Jesus.
I don't care. I'm still finishing this. Thus, for example, the high Christology most clearly articulated in the exordium has been taken as part of the reinterpretation of an earlier apocalyptic eschatological messianism in terms of Hellenistic Gnostic Redeemer myth. The diametrically opposite position has also been defended, and the high Christology taken to be indicative of a position among the addressees of the work to which the author takes exception and which he tries to correct with his emphasis on the incarnation and suffering of the Son.
We're in a weird point where like the chroma key is now not changing.
Yeah, I know.
green
Fine.
screen.
I hear something now.
Behold, I am your Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, and I want to let all you heathens and sinners know that I support this wonderful episode of Atheist Sunday School. Lawrence and Reuben try their very best to bring you the true glory of the Bible, and they need your help. They have provided links to their Patreon page and other social media just for you. Once again, my name is Jesus Christ, and this is Milwaukee Atheists. The Lord is with them. God bless.
Oh, hey, Jesus. You know, we were talking about your nature, and you just had to interrupt. This Jesus guy got so mad that we were talking about, I guess, I don't know, his dad or something, or also him at the same time. And some angels, too. So I don't know if you count them as like your brothers or your sisters or whatever. We were talking about his family, and he had a problem with it, and he had to interrupt me. Wow, what a dick. So, on to chapter 2. Now, for chapter 2, we are getting, well, I guess in here it's called a paranetic interlude, the danger of falling away. So we're done with the Christology portion, at least for now, which was nice while it lasted. That was I thought it was interesting.
It was probably the most interesting reading today, I'll bet.
I mean, yeah, probably. I bet like there's a good chance the rest of this is more like, hey, be a good person
and pray.
Yeah, and pray.
Yep, there you go.
Yeah. So the passage forms something of an interlude in the midst of the first two chapters. The material that this next section, at least, the material that follows continues the comparison of Christ and the angels and begins with a further treatment of Scripture. Okay, gotcha. So a little bit of angelology here, if anything. Oh, look who's returned.
Yes, 'tis I.
Yeah, how you doing?
Okay,
How's your ascension?
great. I came back. I got a water.
Wow. Got a whole water for coming back, huh? All right. Well, I suppose I can probably hop into chapter 2, huh?
Yeah, I mean, you could if you wanted to,
I probably should.
I guess.
Yeah. So chapter 2. Therefore, we must pay closer attention to what we have heard, lest we drift away from it. For since the message declared by angels proved to be reliable, and every transgression or disobedience received a just retribution, how shall we escape if we neglect such a great salvation? It was declared at first by the Lord, and it was attested to us by those who heard, while God also bore witness by signs and wonders and various miracles, and by gifts of the Holy Spirit distributed according to his will. So
I want to point something out here. Again, this idea pops up that the angels provided the Torah to Moses on Mount Sinai. This is not the case. God directly provides the Torah to Moses on Mount Sinai in Exodus. Like it's there.
yeah, pretty directly.
So just some kind of nonsense tradition that gets thrown into the New Testament for some reason.
Yeah, it is. It is funny. It literally just says here that the Torah was delivered by angels is not a datum provided by the biblical account where Yahweh deals with Moses directly. The notion that angels accompanied Yahweh at Sinai is, however, common. The Jewish tradition eventually made these angels intermediaries in the delivery of the Torah, and this tradition was appropriated by early Christians.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, there you go. At least we know how we got there. Continuing on.
Yes.
For it was not to angels that God subjected the world to come, of which we are speaking. It has been testified somewhere. And then it goes on to...
It has been testified somewhere. Someone has testified. The author of Psalm 8, verses 5 through 8. That's what's being referenced here.
Hold on.
Psalm 8, verses 5 through 8. This is what is about to follow. This is what you are about to read.
Can we read that?
Right, yeah. Interesting on the phrasing there.
Mm-hmm. Because apparently it doesn't want to say that David wrote it, like, because I guess the David as the psalmist for all of the Psalms is not something he...
Oh, right. But I still want to check the Greek on that one. What is man that you are mindful of him, or the son of man that you care for him? You made him for a little while lower than the angels. You have crowned him with glory and honor, putting everything in subjection under his feet. So that's the end of the quotation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in putting everything in subjection to him, he left nothing outside his control. At present, we do not yet see everything in subjection to him. But we see him... Sorry, this is so poorly worded. But we see him who for a little while was made lower than the angels, namely Jesus, crowned with glory and honor because of the suffering of death, so that by grace of God he might taste death for everyone.
So, God's purpose from the beginning was that man should be sovereign in the creaturely realm, subject only to God. Due to sin, that purpose of God has not yet been fully realized. Indeed, men are themselves in slavery, as will be stated in verse 15. Jesus here, Psalm 8 is applied to Jesus in particular. As forerunner of man's restored dominion over the earth, He was made lower than the angels for a while, but now is crowned with glory and honor at God's right hand. By his perfect life, his death on the cross, and his exaltation, he has made possible for redeemed man the ultimate fulfillment of Psalm 8 in the future kingdom, where man will regain sovereignty over creation. I also want to point out something. There's an aside here on perfection through suffering. Pervasive in Hebrews, the language of perfection refers to more advanced teachings.
Oh, wait, hold on. Isn't this, this kind of reminds me of in a whole bunch of other literature we've read, there's been this idea of, purification by fire, for example, is one.
Yes.
Or refining,
Yes.
Kind of hammering something into being like much better,
Or melting away.
Yes. Stuff like
Yes.
that.
Impurities. Yes, that is a common biblical motif. The language of perfection in Hebrews refers to more advanced teachings, as in chapter 6, verse 1. The conditions of those who follow Jesus, what the law lacks, but what Jesus achieves, and what Jesus achieves for himself through his suffering. The term itself, teleos, connotes maturity, fulfillment, moral perfection, wholeness, and holiness. In Israelite and Jewish cultic contexts, the Hebrew equivalent for perfection, tamim, refers to the unblemished state of sacrificial animals and the condition of the priest who makes the sacrifice. Many exhortations to be perfect before God appear in the Tanakh. Philo, like the author of Hebrews, favors perfection terminology and uses it to name the goal of the virtuous individual as well as the state of the person who achieves a vision of the divine. Finally, according to Hebrews, Jesus is perfected through his suffering. That is not to say that Jesus starts out as imperfect. In Hebrews, Jesus has divine origins. He is neither lacking anything nor in need of correction. Rather, in Greek, perfection always connotes a developmental process. To move toward perfection is to move toward completion or accomplishment of a goal. The language of perfection through suffering, in reference to Jesus, has in view the claim that Jesus has completed his divine mission to effect permanent expiation and thus enable emergence of the world to come. This peripheral idea of suffering as divine discipline in the Tanakh became mainstream in Hellenistic Judaism. In Wisdom of Solomon, chapter 4, verse 13, the righteous man who dies before reaching old age is said to have been perfected, even though his life was brief. In 4th Maccabees, chapter 7, verse 15, Eleazar's martyrdom is said to have rendered him perfect. In the latter case, the language of perfection describes a pious man suffering to death. Rabbinic literature, perhaps under the influence of the Hadrianic persecutions of 132 to 135 CE, also develops the idea of redemptive suffering, where it is called Yisurin Shel Ahava, chastisements of love.
Yeah, and I go over redemptive suffering in my video on the suffering servant.
Yes.
Yeah. And a whole bunch of other things that went into that idea. Now, I did want to point out here, interestingly enough, this psalm that's being quoted here, it follows pretty closely to the Septuagint version, except for one thing. It omits a clause.
Oh.
Yeah, the clause that is omitted says, "You have set him over the works of your hands." That omission was probably made because the clause refers quite clearly to the mastery of humanity over the present world and would make more difficult the interpretation in terms of Christ, his temporary subjection, and his eschatological reign.
Yeah, so they were cherry picking back then.
Yes,
too.
they were. Yes, they were.
Not even whole verses. You just delete parts that they don't agree with.
Well, I mean, they always cherry picked. That was the whole thing. So, classic stuff. This, now we're going back to Christology, which is good for me. So, on to verse 10. For it was fitting that he, for whom and by whom all things exist. So, I guess I'm going to continue. In bringing many sons to glory, should make the founder of their salvation perfect through suffering. For he who he who sanctifies and those who are sanctified all have one source. That is why he is not ashamed to call them brothers, saying, I will tell of your name to my brothers in the midst of the congregation. I will sing your praise. And I believe that verse is from
Psalm 22, verse 22. The psalm is used to describe Jesus' suffering and death and
Psalm 22 is filled with that stuff that's used in
it's used in Matthew's 27:46 and Mark 15:34. In Hebrews, the citation highlights Jesus' role as mediator between God and humans. The psalm originally speaks in the voice of a supplicant. Jewish sources do not read this psalm as predicting a Messiah.
Yeah, no one would. So I will tell of your name to my brothers in the midst of the congregation. I will sing your praise. And again, I will put my trust in his name. And again, behold!
Behold! Finally.
It's been a while.
Yes.
There we go. Okay. Holy shit.
I've been waiting.
Yeah, it's really been a while. Yeah. Unfortunately that took so long. But we beholden it down here. So I and the children God has given me. Since, therefore, the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise partook of the same things, that through death he might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is, the devil. That's not how that works at all.
Yeah, for the idea that the devil brought death into the world, see Wisdom of Solomon 2:24. What? Pull up Wisdom of Solomon 2:24.
Okay.
Wait, I can... It's somewhere back
I
here.
also I have it.
Yeah. And Wisdom of Solomon 2:24. Although the idea appears in rabbinic literature, it's often minimized or refuted, perhaps due to anti-Christian polemic.
God, I forget which part it was fucking in. I think it was after Song of Solomon, was it? I don't remember.
Wisdom of Solomon?
Yeah. Or am I thinking of something else?
No, you're thinking of something else.
I'm thinking of something else, aren't I?
Yeah.
Ugh. That's annoying. Oh, no, I'm my dumbass. I'm thinking of Proverbs. I'm thinking of Proverbs. Okay.
Wisdom 2:24. But by the envy of the devil, death entered the world, and they who are allied with him experience it. This is also the first biblical text part to equivocate the serpent of Genesis with the devil. So yes, they're saying that
that
death enters the world because of the curse that's put on Adam and Eve
Yeah.
as a consequence of original sin, which is not a thing in Judaism, but in Christianity it is. So there you go. That's your devil bringing death into the world.
All right. Oh my God.
You're on verse 15.
Right. Okay. I did want to finish the verse before hopping into the big reading there. Verse 15. And deliver all those who through fear of death were subject to lifelong slavery. And this is, of course, being to the material world, I'm guessing. For surely it is not angels that he helps, but he helps the offspring of Abraham. Therefore, he had to be made like his brothers in every respect, so that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in the service of God, to make propitiation for the sins of his people. For because he himself has suffered when tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted.
So we also see this reference to the offspring of Abraham. Now, if you recall from the Pauline letters, this includes Christians who are of Gentile descent. When they're using it, they're not using the offspring of Abraham to refer to the Jews. They were using it to refer to those who are within the body of Christ.
So I think we talked about perfection through suffering.
Yeah, extensively. We don't need to talk anymore about that.
And then I could swear there was something else that I wanted to bring up, but no, I think we actually did cover most of it.
Verse 17, it says in every respect here. For Hebrews, Jesus is both fully human and fully divine. This thesis became Christian doctrine in 325 at the Council of Nicaea, and was definitively formulated at the Council of Chalcedon in 451.
Chalcedon, good stuff.
Chalcedon. Chalcedon.
Oh, dear God.
Jesus as high priest is unique to Hebrews. For Jewish anticipations of a messianic high priest, see 1QS 9:11 in the Testament of Levi 18:1 through 14. Paradoxically, Jesus is both perfect priest and perfect sacrifice. Yep. Kind of like Odin, how Odin sacrifices himself to himself by hanging himself.
Yeah, that's a weird story, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So this, I was kind of interested on, like, oh, you're gonna make you look like your brother, sort of thing. What was that? Was in this verse 16?
Like, the point is that
that was 17. Okay.
The atonement requires sacrifices, and the Yom Kippur sacrifices can only be offered by the high priest. So
yeah, it makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Oh man, there's so much. At some point I'm gonna have to maybe just make a video about this Christology, because there's honestly like so much info in here.
I think, yeah.
It's wild. Like, there's no shot we're covering all that.
No. But you've got like one more verse or two.
No.
No?
Yeah, yes.
You're
So it
at
ended
18?
with verse 18. Yes, for because he himself has suffered when tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted.
Okay. So, yes. Suffering was frequently interpreted as a test from God. The idea is found in biblical, Second Temple, and rabbinic texts. Abraham was tested at the Akedah, and the tests of Abraham are developed in early Jewish and rabbinic literature. So this is a common motif. Anyways, hey, that's the end of chapter 2, ain't it?
It is, yeah. That one definitely went a lot faster because we mostly covered all the deep Christological stuff for chapter 1.
Mm-hmm.
And it just kind of continued on through here. Jesus as high priest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Man, there's so much stuff to cover here. This is reinvigorating my interest in Christology.
Oh, it was deinvigorated?
No, it wasn't. I mean, I've been like studying, a few other things recently. So I hadn't hopped into Christology for a while. Like I was planning on doing that video on Chalcedon. That would have been my next council video.
You should.
Well, yeah, that's still going to be my next council video.
You should do one about Chalcedon too.
Oh dear God. But I've been, working on the Akhenaten thing for a while. So I've been very deep in that.
Well, you should do more. Do more videos.
Yeah. I gotcha.
I'm sure all of our viewers want you to do more.
They just want videos. They want everyday uploads.
They don't care what it does to you.
No, they don't give a shit. Yeah.
We've got a new strap for that later. Anyways.
Do I think these chapters? I'm not sure if I think these chapters. I
don't know. Anyways, chapter 3.
Do I think they require a physical Jesus? These chapters
Yes,
specifically
very
as a
clearly.
high priest. I mean,
very
yes,
clearly.
yes,
Yeah.
because you'd have no need for these different sections of angels if you're, and specifically one being as a redeemer and suffering. If it's all
he needs to
celestial.
be physical in order to be established as lesser than the angels for a period of time.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, chapter 3. Wherefore, holy brethren, partakers of the heavenly calling, consider the apostle and high priest of our profession, Christ Jesus, who was faithful to him that appointed him, as also Moses was faithful in all his house. So he's comparing him to Moses here, just directly, for the sake of comparing him to Moses.
He's always been compared to Moses.
Because he's supposed to be the prophet.
He's supposed to be like the new Moses, the new guy.
Moses.
Yeah.
Yep.
He's a better Moses.
Yep.
Newer is always better, as I have learned from Barney Stinson.
Mm-hmm.
From How I
Just
Met
like
Your Mother.
with biblical manuscripts, newer is always
Newer
better.
is always better.
Yep.
Ugh.
For this man was counted worthy of more glory than Moses, inasmuch as he who hath builded the house hath more honor than the house. Okay, preeminent Christ stuff there. For every house is builded by some man, but he that built all things is God. And Moses verily was faithful in all his house.
Every painting has a painter, Reuben.
Yes, but the one who painted all painters is Paintismo,
Wow, that's pretty good.
the Paint King.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
I'll take that. Yeah.
Yep. And Moses verily was faithful in all his house, as a servant for a testimony of those things which were to be spoken after. But Christ as a son over his own house, whose house are we, if we hold fast to the confidence and the rejoicing of the hope firm unto the end. Wherefore, as the Holy Ghost saith, today, if ye will hear his voice, harden not your hearts, as in the provocation, in the day of temptation in the wilderness, when your fathers tempted me, proved me, and saw my works 40 years. Obviously a reference to Exodus. We're continuing with this comparison to Moses' theme. It's very on the nose. Yeah. Wherefore I was grieved with that generation and said, they do always err in their heart, and they have not known my ways. So I swear in my wrath, they shall not enter into my rest. So here a reference to Moses not being allowed entry into.
That would make sense. Although I also want to point out here that the section beforehand about, how great the son is and, Moses being a faithful servant and whatnot, the comparison between Christ and Moses raises questions similar to those posed by the comparison between Christ and the angels, and various rationales for the comparison have been proposed. Now, I think it's just supposed to be like, oh, this guy's the new guy. He was presented as the new guy, even in the Gospels, as the new Moses.
It's the
whole thing.
It's literally the news, the good news.
The good news. That Hebrews was attempting to refute an explicit Moses Christology, such as that found in later Ebionite sources, is highly unlikely, since polemic on the subject, as in the case of the angels, is singularly absent. Moreover, the Christological traditions which the author assumes and tries to revivify are incompatible with such a low Christology. The comparison between Christ and Moses serves rhetorical, not polemical purposes. Yep. In considering the comparison between Christ and the angels, we noted significant parallels between the image of heaven, angelic priests, and the Christological portrait of Hebrews. And we argued that our text is indebted to traditional Jewish speculation. Similar observations can be made about Moses, who, according to the scriptural accounts of his lineage, was a Levite. While the Pentateuch does not dwell on this priestly connection, later Jewish sources would do so. Oh yeah, like he would go face to face with God. He was the only person allowed in the Holy of Holies, right?
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. All right. Take heed, brethren, lest there be in any of you an evil heart of unbelief in departing from the living God. But exhort one another daily, while it is called today, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. For we are made partakers of Christ, if we hold the beginning of our confidence steadfast unto the end, while it is said today, if ye will hear his voice, harden not your hearts, as in the provocation. For some, when they had heard, did provoke, howbeit not all that came out of Egypt by Moses. But with whom was he grieved 40 years? Was it not with them that had sinned, whose carcasses fell in the wilderness? And to whom sware he that they should not enter into his rest, but to them that believed not? So we see that they could not enter in because of unbelief. And that's the end of chapter 3. The whole point there is that a lack of belief in God results in death, right? And death is in the permanent death.
Soul destruction.
Total destruction, because they do not have life everlasting in the kingdom thereafter.
Yes, the phrasing here is kind of interesting. So in the center of this pericope is the first verse of the Psalm citation. Yeah, the first verse reappears. The syntax is awkward. The preposition. Actually, I'm not going to go into the grammar here. If the verse is thus taken with what follows, there is an extremely awkward. I don't even know what the fuck that word is. Anacoluthon.
Anacoluthon.
Okay. And the God in verse 16 indicates that a new grammatical and logical unit begins. Where was I here? Right. Okay. So from verse 19, I should say. I was reading a different verse that I should not have been reading. The series of questions concludes with an observation that draws the first portion of the homily to a climactic close in the same terms with which it begins. So, we see and faithlessness are included there. And considering the story of the Exodus generation, and in particular Numbers 14, the addressees can infer that it was faithlessness that prevented the Israelites' entry to God's rest. The move from disobedience to faithlessness is not argued, but the close association of the two terms was traditional. But of course, it's not quite the same, because in the ancient world, the people that they would have been talking about being disobedient was being faithless. But now in the modern world, we can probably make that differentiation.
Right.
Yeah.
So beyond that, Hebrews much better. I'd say like this guy
is a much better writer. First of all,
whoever wrote this should have been like the Paul. Right?
Yeah, he should have been the guy.
Yeah,
Paul.
He's like the real deal. Because what we have here is not only is it like continuous references, right? And sometimes there's a little, flubbing around with it. But it is like an attempt at continuous references. There's tons of like little tongue-in-cheek stuff that's thrown in. It like there's very highbrow humor that's involved, and it appears to have been written by someone with a much better understanding of the Old Testament.
Well, I mean, yeah, I would say yeah, probably, but at the same time, he does like to misrepresent a few things.
Yes, he does like to misrepresent a few things.
He cherry picks a lot.
Well, this could be a consequence of a post-70 CE time of writing, right?
Right, yeah. No.
It could just be that at the point in time that this guy's around, he's just got like hearsay about stuff.
He could have, although because he makes actual like citations.
Yes,
of Psalms.
Make citations.
Yeah, I think that he would have had access to those. So he does cherry pick.
Who do you think this is? They have to have some kind of prominent standing, or they have to have some kind of prominent standing in order to even have the education necessary in order to read this stuff. But beyond that,
I think it was definitely a Jewish guy before converting to Christianity.
I think that this is a convert from Judaism to Christianity, possibly the earliest example. No, because like all of them are converts of Judaism to Christianity, except for the Gentiles.
Right? Yeah.
We don't have any writings by. Actually, no, we do, right? One of them.
I'm sure we do.
One of them's by. But anyways, beyond that,
but this guy would have been like, I really feel like this author is a hell of a lot smarter.
This seems like a guy who's like going to rabbinical school,
right? Exactly,
or like graduated from was going to rabbinical school.
Yeah,
this is a student.
Yeah,
yeah.
Really feels like that kind of author. Yeah. Definitely way better than Paul.
Definitely.
You're right though. Should have been the guy.
Should have been the guy.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, not only is it not the guy, we don't even know their name.
Who the guy is?
No. Unfortunate.
Or who this is to. Or
yeah, we don't really know. Although it seems like it would make sense if it was for the Jews.
It would make sense.
Yeah, it would make sense to the Hebrews. Yeah.
So I could envision this being a Jewish person, possibly a rabbi, right? Possibly a rabbi who is converting to Christianity and has written something to present to the synagogue, right? The place at which they are providing religious services, right? That could be something, right? It could be like someone's like tongue-in-cheek letter to their parents.
Could be.
Like, oof.
Oh.
But anyways, who knows? Hey, if you enjoyed the stream so far, or if you enjoyed the stream today, because this is like the end, man, like, share, subscribe, check it out. Check us out on Patreon. You could be on the show.
You could win T-shirts. Speaking of T-shirts,
buy yourself a T-shirt.
You could just buy yourself a T-shirt, or you could become a patron and get a chance to win a T-shirt.
Yeah, you see that pinned T-shirt right there?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite ones. What was that? Nothing New Under the Sun? One of my favorite T-shirts right there.
You can click that pin like you pin the tail on a donkey. Yeah.
You guys,
no Jewish philosophy on the wish list.
You're right. There is
direct message, Lawrence.
I don't think there's just there are books on Judaism and the history of Judaism.
You have to change your name on the Discord because he's number 0 and I'm number 1.
I should just -1.
You have to be number 2.
No, I should be -1.
Oh, you could be -1.
Yeah, I like -1. Anyways, all the links, and we will see you on Friday, and then I'll probably see you on Wednesday too, because we're doing the show on